Hi everyone, welcome back to the painting table. We are on part 2 of Joseph, Mary, and the Baby. To work on the hair we'll need olive branch on our palette, and we'll be using Josonia's number 6 oval dry brush. Load your brush with the paint and swirl it out on a paper towel. And this is a dry brush. And we'll be adding color down the center area of the hair. Leaving the edges dark. And some dry brushing on Joseph's beard. And his hair. We'll be lining the hair strands on both Joseph and Mary now, and you'll need Marigold on your palette. I'll be lining with my number 1 short liner, and I want a nice inky consistency with my paint. If the lining is coming out a little too transparent, then lighten up on the flow medium and just add a touch. All the hair strands are done with Marigold first. I find if I take my time while I'm lining and really pay attention to how much pressure I'm putting on the tip of my brush, my lining is much more successful. Okay, the second step in creating the hair is done, and that's lining all the Marigold hair strands. Now I'm going to take an eraser and erase any stray graphite lines. Okay, to create a little more variation in the hair, you want to add some warm white to your Marigold and create a lighter mix. Alright, let's add some highlights to some of our hair strands. I like to add touches of highlight to the curves of the hair. Okay, a few on Joseph's beard too. Maybe a little more up here. Okay, I think I'm done. One last thing with the hair, you can always return in with your raw umber and add more variation to the hair. This creates a bit more contrast. I don't need to do too much of this. Just a touch here and there. Alrighty, we're making some progress. We finished Mary and Joseph. We will be splattering them later at the very end when we do all the pieces together. And the sheep will be done with the shepherd, so watch out for that video. Right now we need to finish up our baby Jesus. We'll be highlighting the baby's blanket next, so we'll need cad yellow mid and marigold on our palette. Let's use our number 8 oval dry brush. Grab a little bit of your marigold and then a lot more of your cad yellow. I'd say this is a 1:4 ratio, 1 being the marigold and 4 with the cad yellow. At this point, you need to dry brush the highlights on the blanket with the cad yellow mix. Alright, next let's lighten up our highlight mix with a touch of warm white. So again, the brightest area is right up against the edge here. Alright. And then down underneath the head. And onto the side. I want to brighten up my highlight even further, so I'm going to add another layer, one more layer, adding more warm white to my mix. Alright, so I added more warm white to my dirty brush and I'm touching the edges here I don't need to carry this highlight down as far as the others. Just a touch on the edge. You can see how it brightens it up there. And then down at the head, just a touch there too. Now you'll need a touch of Norwegian orange on your palette. We'll be lining the stripes on the baby's blanket next. Dampen your brush with a little bit of water and then wipe it out on a paper towel. And then load your brush with the Norwegian orange and take some of it off on your paper towel. This is a number 4 flat, and I'll be dry brushing that stripe in. I want it to be scratchy looking. There. And I also want to continue the stripe onto the side. It's a good idea to apply a thin layer of glazing medium over the baby's blanket before you attempt the stripe. That way, if you make any mistakes, you can easily wipe it up and not take off any of the dry brushing that you did previously. Now with our number 1 short liner, we'll line in our smaller stripe. This is not dry brushed, it's just a regular stripe. And then continuing on to the edge. Now with the same brush, let's add the short stitches on this wider stripe. We're using the cadmium yellow marigold mix. And they're just diagonal stitches like so. I'd like to fit in 3 more stitches before I get to the edge there. There's 1, 2, and 3. Okay, now that I have the baby and the baby's blanket done, I can return in with the raw umber and re-base coat this area. Okie dokie, now to work on our manger, we'll need olive branch on our palette, and we'll also be using our number 8 oval dry brush. So you probably guessed it, we'll be dry brushing, so load your brush and take out the paint on your paper towel. And we're adding our highlights to our manger. Let's lighten up the areas in the center. And also working on the sides. We're scrubbing our brush back and forth. Occasionally you'll need to reload your brush. Okay. Now let's mix Husk with Olive Branch to create a lighter highlight color. It's a 1-to-1 mix. And I'm swirling that color out on a paper towel, removing most of the color. Now I'm adding another dry brush layer with a light touch. You want to keep stroking your brush over the surface to even out the strokes and create a nice soft dry brush look. Okay, now I'm continuing on the edges. I could use a little more paint on my brush. It's starting to run out. Okay. Next, transfer the grain lines with your white graphite paper. I have the grain lines transferred on the front, and on the sides I'll use my chalk pencil to freehand those in. If you feel like you need your pattern, you can always use your pattern, elements of your pattern, to trace those in. Now, using your liner brush and the color Husk, you can line all your grain lines. My brush is loaded and ready with Husk, so I'll start lining. The way I tend to do my lining is I'll rough it in first and then go back over it with a thicker line. And since the manger lines are a little thicker, it's not so hard to do this. Alright, I've relined everything. You can see the lines are much thicker and we're ready to move on to floating. But before we do, we need to coat the whole piece with some clear glazing medium to set the paint. A nice light coat will do. It can be done really quickly. Alright, to do our floating we'll need raw umber and brown earth on our palette, and we'll be mixing those together at a 1-to-1 ratio. This will be our floating color. I have my number 12 flat and I've side loaded my paint onto my brush. I'm shading right under the curve on the manger. Okay, for more shading, I like to rinse out my brush and reload it each time, just so I have a fresh start every time I float. Let's add some shading to the corners of the legs. So, and how about under the blanket on the long edge? Now under the blanket on the short edge. Keep a mop brush handy for touching up any floats. Now let's shade on the upper corners. I'm catching just the corner. And above the curve of the manger. Okay, let's do the edges now. Let's start up at the top and work right next to the blanket. In the crease or in the corner. And down on the edge, like so. On the other side, right up against the blanket, in the corner. And at the bottom. Well, side by side, they're not too far apart. This is the original. The last thing we need to do is highlight some of the grain lines. Before I reinforce my grain lines, I noticed that I could probably use a good line right underneath this curve. So I'm using just straight raw umber, my liner brush, and I'm adding a thin line to separate the top and the bottom. Okay, back to our liner brush and the color husk. It should still be on your palette. We'll go back in and highlight a few of the grain lines, create some contrast. We don't need to reline every stroke, we're just adding highlights to a few of them. This is similar to how we did Joseph and Mary's hair. Okay, I think we got it. The last thing we need to do on this baby is the splattering, which we'll wait till the end to do that. Before we move on to painting the word block, I wanted to show you what makes us a 3D nativity. The baby Jesus can be pushed down all the way into the piece, or he can be held out a little bit, so it gives it a 3D effect. That's why it's important to paint your edges.